Hey everyone, welcome to October in the Abyss. I'm Rob Adams of the Actors Workshop. And as many of you know, I am a huge fan of the month of October. I love Halloween and I love the build up to Halloween. And what I try to do throughout the month is I try to watch some sort of horror film, monster film, etc. Each night starting October 1st. I do categorize film, right? So like there are the monster movies, Dracula, Frankenstein, etc. Then there's your horror films, Friday the 13th, Halloween, then there's your slasher films, stuff like Scream, stuff like, whether you guys know what I'm talking about, the slasher type films where they're a little more gory. Not a big fan of that genre so much. And then you have the suspense kind of horror, which is stuff that maybe like a Psycho, which is a suspense horror kind of film. So, throughout the month, I kind of just mix up watching the different movies that I like through those genres. And I think it makes it a lot of fun to enjoy the month and watch just that style of movie throughout the month. So what I decided to do today to mix up, because we've been talking about craft quite a bit, is go over 10 movies that I pulled here, and I'm not going to really go into what the movies are about. I'm just going to give you a quick 1, 2, 3 about them, but 10 movies that probably you've never heard of that kind of fit this genre of film. I'm going to start with a movie from the 90s. It's called Jack's Back with James Spader. It is a twist on the return of Jack the Ripper. And I'll leave it at that because it's not as obvious as it seems. I'm a huge Spader fan. I know many of you are as well. It's kind of an obscure film that he did, but it's a good one to check out for sure. Next up is a movie from 1957 called The Vampire. I don't know a lot about this other than it's kind of a twist of Jekyll and Hyde, but instead of him becoming Mr. Hyde, he turns into a vampire. So it's not a traditional vampire type film. And there's many of these movies that... there's another one from 1958 called I Bury the Living, which I've ordered. I'm waiting to get here. Hopefully sometime next week that will be one of the movies I watch this month. But there's some really good movies from the 50s that were considered, monster movies, horror films that kind of got lost in the shuffle, if you will. And The Vampire is definitely one of those movies. And it's cool that I was able to get this. I got it super cheap. It's going out of print. So I'm excited to give it a watch. Next up is, I gotta always have it in there, a Brian De Palma film. It's called Sisters. Margot Kidder stars in this, and it is kind of a horror suspense based on these two sisters and a scientist. And once again, I'll just keep saying this. I'll leave it at that. I want you guys to watch the movies and enjoy them. But as you guys know, I'm a huge De Palma fan. And I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, he was the master of the horror genre. And we talked about him through some of the years when I was doing the countdown and such. So I had to make sure I included one. And this was the obvious one because I don't know how many people know about this movie. But it's really good. Okay, I picked out a couple of movies from... with Vincent Price. I'm a huge Vincent Price fan. I think he was the master of horror films in the 60s. The first one I'll point out is the original Fly. I know you guys know the one with Jeff Goldblum. This one's really good. And what I like about the original Fly, and I love the remake with Jeff Goldblum, and I love it because they did it differently. This one, the way that he turns into the Fly is very different. There's actually two flies rather than one. So it's a really fun, great horror suspense film, and you guys know the premise of The Fly. This is the original. All right, next up in the Vincent Price, The Haunted Palace. We've talked about this. I love movies that are based on trains. I also like movies that are based on or in just a place, a castle, a house, whatever. Clue. Knives Out most recently, Murder by Death, which is like the original Knives Out Clue from 1976, which also I just ordered and hopefully will be here in the next couple of weeks so I can watch it this month as well. And, this The House on Haunted Hill is one that Vincent Price did that's kind of like that, and the Haunted Palace is another one up that alley. And the same way I've described in the past those movies that are on trains, put everybody in a house, lock the doors, and let the thrill begin. And Vincent Price once again is the master, and this is a really good one to watch. The last one with Vincent Price is The Fall of the House of Usher. Another classic, some good twists and turns in this one. And once again, the Fall of the House of Usher, based in a certain location, and the stories that go behind it. And I think that was what was kind of cool with the Vincent Price movies. House of Wax, The Fall of the House of Usher. We just talked about Haunted Palace, House on Haunted Hill that we talked about. Those movies all kind of have the same thing. And, when we talk about actors in the past, we've talked about a formula. Well, Vincent Price had that formula. He may have been one of the original formula actors, and they just kind of did different twists and turns. They would take Edgar Allan Poe stories. Let me try that again. Edgar Allan Poe stories and put them in these horror films. And sometimes it wasn't even based off the book. It was just using the name of the book to pull people in to watch the movies. And then sometimes it was loosely based off of the book. But there was definitely a formula, and there was definitely a lot about these kinds of movies that were really, really super cool. And I think Vincent Price was the master, and you guys got to delve deep into the catalog and start watching these because they're great. All right. Next up is Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. If you've been in my class, you've heard me talk about the Hammer film series. For those who don't know, everybody knows that the Universal monsters were the originals. Those are the ones that started at the beginning. Those were the ones, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Werewolf, etc., or the Wolfman, excuse me. And after those kind of faded away, some of the themes were rebooted by this company called Hammer Films. And this is where you get Christopher Lee as Dracula. You get Peter Cushing as Dr. Frankenstein. You get The Mummy. You get all these movies rebooted and done in a different way. And Hammer Films did such a good job. And if you watch a few of my unboxings, you'll see me talk about Madhouse, which is a Vincent Price going backwards, but also a few Hammer Film movies that I bought through the Kinos. And that's why I didn't bring them out here today, because I already talked about them in the unboxings. But Hammer had a whole genre. If you just look up Hammer Films, there's so many of them, and there's so many to delve into, and there's so many different Draculas, and there's so many different Frankensteins. And this is one of the I don't even know which number of the Frankenstein stories this is. This was just one of the ones that I saw and I really liked, and I bought it. It's really good. Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, these guys were great at these roles. And and I talked about this before, that Lucas loved these movies. That's why he used Peter Cushing in Star Wars. That's why he used Christopher Lee in the reboots, right? That's why, or the prequels, not the reboots. But that's why Lucas absolutely had to love the Hammer films. You could just see the influence. When you watch Christopher Lee as Dooku, you see Dracula. When you watch Moff Tarkin, you see Peter Cushing. And that makes these movies so great. Give them a chance. All right, so I led you in with the Universal monsters, or I just talked about it leading into the Hammer films, and so I'm gonna finish with the last three of these are actually Universal films that were broken away from Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, Mummy, etc., but use the same actors in different ways because they were contracted with Universal. So for a lot of people that don't know, back in the day, you basically were under contract with the studio. And that was the studio you worked for, whether it be Universal, Paramount, 20th Century, whatever. And so when the Universal Monsters was started in 1931, they had Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney Jr. And actually, I think the Universal Monsters actually started in 1925 with Phantom of the Opera and Lon Chaney Sr., but all those guys were under contract, so they were doing, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. You had those actors in it, and they were always reprising their roles. And you see them in different movies, like, for example, the Wolfman, Bela Lugosi plays, the gypsy guy, Bela, who gets bitten by the wolf. Spoiler alert, you've had, you know, the movie was in 40, so you've had 60 plus years to watch it. 41, but you know, I'm rounding up. Anyways, first one to show you, Bela Lugosi, Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue. And this was loosely based off of the book, using a star of the time, and a great horror film. I wouldn't even call it a monster movie, but a horror film based on Poe's works, and one of the classic monster icon looking actors. I got him on my shirt right now as Dracula, Bela Lugosi. It's a must watch. You got to find it and check it out. Next up, this should have been just a Dracula movie. It's The Return of the Vampire. It is not a Dracula movie, but Bela Lugosi does play a vampire in it. And if you look at the back and you look at the picture, I mean, he might as well be Dracula. But what they did was they took his popularity as Dracula and just did a different type movie in it, and it's really good, because you get that formula, which is unbelievable. So this is another great Universal movie that people just don't know about. And then the last one is Boris Karloff, who played the Mummy, who played Frankenstein, and that is in The Body Snatcher, what is also starring Bela Lugosi. And as you can see, how they kind of use these guys over and over again, like I said. And it's, you know, another fun twist on the characters of the time with Universal when it came to the monster side, the horror side, etc. So anyhow, those are 10 movies that you should absolutely go check out. And you know what? Like I said, check out the Hammer films. There's a lot of them. Check out the ones with Vincent Price. There's a ton of them. They're hard to find, but I think right now in October, they've got to be on Netflix. They've got to be on Hulu. They've got to be on pay-per-view, or not pay-per-view, but on demand or whatever. They're going to be out there. So instead of watching the traditional stuff where you can watch a Psycho at any time, although I just did get the new 60th anniversary original cut on Steelbook, which is super cool. And I'm excited to watch that because it's actually the way it was released in the theaters back in the day. For whatever reason, when they released it on video and TV, they edited it, and that's the version that everybody's seen since. So unless you saw it in the theater, you've only seen it the one way. This is only a minute 10 longer, but you're getting to see it the way that Hitchcock originally did it for the theater. So super cool. Glad to get my hands on that. But I'm not going to watch it unless I have time, because I'm going to be delving deeper into the stuff that you can't watch on everyday TV, whereas Psycho's been on, and Halloween will be on, and Friday the 13th, which, by the way, I just got the full box set. It'll be here in the middle of the month. So those kinds of things you can find and see. Find these and give them a chance. The way they're restoring these films, the way they look, the way they sound, the way they are, it's bringing old Hollywood back. And if you've never seen them, you're missing out. Check them out. And if you have any questions of what I suggest or which ones to watch first, don't hesitate to comment, and I will, of course, let you know my own opinion. I appreciate you watching. Enjoy your weekend. We will see you with a new video next week.